Happy Friday, Periscope. I just wanted to jump on really quick to say, hey, how you doing? I hope you have had an amazing week. You have made it yet through another week in spite of whatever. If you're living, moving, and breathing, then you're here. You should be grateful and thankful. Hello, thanks for joining. Thanks for joining my scope. I just wanted to get on for those who've never been on. Hi. My name is Latoya L. Wallace. I am one that has vitiligo. I am a current author who just published my first book, The Dark Side That Birthed My Worship. And it talks about my story, my journey, and my victory with vitiligo. One who has had vitiligo since she was 12 years old. So I talk about my books. Or I have written a book and I talk about encounters and different things that I faced growing up with vitiligo. There's several different things. But today I wanted to get on and I wanted to talk about one of the chapters in my book, and it's called The Makeup. Hey, day by days, how are you? Hope you are having an amazing day thus far. So there's a chapter in my book called The Makeup. And in this chapter in my book, I talk about when I was a little girl, the white patches began to appear in my face, and they began to appear around my eyes. They began to appear around my nose and my mouth. I'm doing absolutely amazing. So I wanted to get on and just talk about one of the chapters in my book, recent author to The Dark Side That Birthed My Worship. And what is vitiligo? Vitiligo is a skin condition that takes the melanin out of your pigment, out of your skin. So ultimately, you lose all of the pigment in your skin, even in your hair follicles. You lose the pigment. And so I share in this book that I have never spoken about, have never opened my mouth and even talked about, different encounters and different circumstances that God pulled me out of and ultimately birthed my worship, which is my devotion and relationship to Him. And so I talk about the dark side. I talk about the mental torment. I talk about the mental instability that I faced as a kid growing up with it, whether it be bullying, whether it be unloved from my parents, not being supported, whether it be, isolation, rejection, abandonment, all the different things that I encountered, I talk about in this book. But again, there's one chapter in my book where I talk about the makeup. And so what happened was when I was maybe 13, somewhere around there, my father, he was told about a makeup. He was told about this cream that can cover your skin and make your skin an even tone, right? And so what I did, he came to me and he told me that he wanted us to go make an appointment to go try this makeup. And at first I was like, okay, because in my mind during that time, I was in that why me stage. Why did I have to go through this? Why is my skin changing? Why nobody else's skin is changing? Why is my life has to be this way? I got all the stares, all the disgusting looks, all the people who turned away from me, all the people who did all these different things that I encountered just as a little girl. I just wanted to be a little girl just as normal as anybody else. But I couldn't do that, or I wasn't treated that way because of my skin. I was born a chocolate dark little girl, as dark as you can see the different spots even now that has reappeared on my skin. But I was even darker than the darker spots that you see now on my face or on my skin. So in this chapter, there's this cream, and it's called Fashion Fair. I think that was the name of it. So what happened was my father, he took me to a store, a cosmetic store, to where they, dress you up. They put makeup on it, different things like that. So it was this cream that he wanted me to try to put on to cover up the spots in my face. During this time, I had what they call the raccoon face. So I had the spots around my eyes. I had these big patches around my eyes, around my lips, and around my nose. I had these big patches. So at this point, I was called raccoon face. I was called spots. I was called, damn 101 damnation. All these different things was going on. But I was mentally battling a torment of depression and a shame. And so when we get to the place and we get there, and the lady is so nice, such a beautiful lady, she wanted to try to put this cream on my face to cover it up because I'm crying out. I'm trying to figure out why. I don't want this. I don't want to deal with this. And so I sit there. She make my face up and everything, close my eyes. I sit there. She make my face up. She put the cream on my face because the cream is to even out your skin tone. So she put the cream on my face. But this is the thing that happens. In the chapter, I talk about how she put the cream on my face. I talked about how I was so excited and I wanted to see and I wanted to just, you know, go back to that place of normality where I just had one skin tone. I was just that little chocolate girl. So she put the makeup on, and then once everything was done, she asked me, was I ready? I told her, I said, yes, I'm ready. I turns around, she turns me around, and I turn around and I look in the mirror, and when I open my eyes, it was what appeared to be the most beautiful little chocolate little girl that you can ever imagine, right? I had my skin was back to the way it was before I started having these patches appear in my face. But what happened in that moment, I looked at myself and I looked myself in the mirror for a very long time, and tears began to come down my face. I began to cry, and before I could mess the cream up and the makeup that was on my face, I turned to my dad and I told him that I wanted to take it off my face. And so he told me that he asked me, was I okay? He asked me, was everything fine? And I told him, no, I need to take this off my face. I need you to take it off. They asked me what was wrong. I said I didn't want it. They asked me how I look. I said nothing. Just take it off. Just take it off. So in the chapter, I talk about how oftentimes we as people, we want to cover up the very thing that God finds beautiful. We want to cover up the thing that God actually takes, that imperfected thing, or he takes that thing what we consider to be so ugly, and he perfects it and he makes it beautiful. And so even in that moment, I felt more ashamed and more embarrassed by having the actual cream on that was making me look the way I wanted to look, and versus me just taking it off and being who I was authentically made to be, being who God had actually chose me to be the person who has vitiligo, to be the person who has to go through this process for me to turn out to be who he has called me to be, right? And so that is what we do. A lot of times we cover ourselves up. We cover who the authentic person who he is because we're not satisfied with who we are. We don't half of the time, sometimes don't even know who we are. And because we don't know who we are, we begin to put on this makeup. We begin to put on these different identities. We begin to put on who someone else think that we should be. You know, the magazine, and we supposed to be looking like the next top model, but that's not who God wanted us to be. And so a lot of times we put this makeup on. A lot of times we want to cover up. We want to cover up all the ugly. We want to cover up all the imperfections of what we think it is, and not actually seeking and accepting who God has created us to be, and begin to see that as beauty. Begin to see that as beautiful as he see us. Like how we know the Bible tells us we was beautifully and wonderfully made in him, right? But a lot of times we don't understand that, so we cover up. We want to put these things on. And so even in that moment, like I said, what I thought I was what I wanted, because I wanted to be back normal. I wanted to be back to that little girl who just had that one skin tone, who didn't have to go through all the different patches and didn't have to go through all the different stares and the ridicule and the criticism and the different things, the whispers and all these different things that I had to encounter from other kids, from other parents, from other people who just really didn't understand. I wanted to cover that up with makeup, right? But once I got the makeup on my face, I felt even more worse than I did when I didn't have it on. I felt more embarrassed and more shameful. I didn't even want it on. I wanted to take it off. I wanted to be who I was made to be. And at that point, that's when God showed me that. Even then, as a little girl, that's when he showed me that. So I wanted to get on to not only just talk about that chapter in my book when I talk about that, but I also wanted to share and just encourage someone. You know, we have to begin to take the makeup off. And sometimes we can put makeup on top of makeup on top of makeup, and it doesn't necessarily have to be anything cosmetic. It can be the things we can put on clothes on top of clothes, and we never get to the underneath. We never show who the real person is. We never show who the real identity and authenticity of ourselves. We never get to that place because we can put on all these different things. And a lot of times it comes from what people put on us. Word curses can latch onto us. Word curses can latch onto who we are, and it can ultimately change our identity if we don't know who we are. So we got to take the makeup off. We got to remove the makeup. We got to do a cleansing, a facial cleansing, a heart cleansing, a body cleansing. We have to do those different things to get to the core and get to the rawness of who God has created us to be, to get to the rawness of who he has created us to be, right? To who he knows we are to be. And we have to seek him for who we are in him. Because if we don't, we'll find ourselves putting on that makeup. We'll find ourselves wearing someone else's clothes. We'll find ourselves wearing someone else's identity. We'll find ourselves being someone else. We'll find ourselves walking in somebody else's shoes. We'll find ourselves wearing somebody else's garments by putting on the makeup and not accepting, not receiving, not believing who you authentically is, who God has uniquely made you to be. So I encourage someone to take a look in the mirror. Look at those layers. Look at things that you have put makeup on top of. And those very things that you put makeup on top of, identify those things. Recognize what those things are. And take the makeup off. Do a cleansing. So, to find out more about my book and the more different encounters that I do express in my book, go onto my website, www.latoyalwallace.com. You can find out more about me. You can find out more about my book, and you can actually place your order. Like I said, it's the dark side that birthed my worship. It talk about, encounters that I've had growing up with vitiligo, and ultimately how I found God in that. It says birth my worship. So it talks about my worship. It talks about how I began to develop an intimate relationship with God in the dark place, in the darkness, and how he birthed who I am today out of the darkness, how he set me free, how he liberated me to where he gave me dominion, power, and authority over the very thing that the enemy thought he was going to have me in bondage to. And to encourage someone else to let my testament and to let my story and to let my journey ultimately and my victory become a victory in your life, whatever dark moment that you have in your life. So you can go on Amazon and order the book. You can find me on all social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, here on Periscope at I can be reached on all those social media channels. So until next time, I hope you have an amazing weekend. Peace and blessings unto you. Sweet peace and sweet rest.